Welcome to How the World Works, where we talk about jobs and work and jobs we've had and what they've meant and what work means in the economy and in our lives. I'm Kevin Williamson. I'm a writer in residence here at the Competitive Enterprise Institute. And I'm a little afraid that people are going to think I'm being funny when I say that after all the political people and journalists and think tankers and stuff we've had on in the last few months, the conversation I've really been looking forward to is with our friendly neighborhood cheesemonger. Here we have Jill Erber, who is the proprietor of Cheese Teak and Corso restaurants in the Washington, D.C. area. I guess Cheese Teak's in Alexandria, is that correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Mm-hmm.
And she has done many things in her life. She is a graduate of the University of Chicago and has had all sorts of interesting jobs in her pre-cheesemongering life, and we'll talk about some of those as well. And I am curious about how one ends up becoming a cheese professional. But first, I want to ask you about life on the boat when you were little.
Life on the boat. Yes. So when I was young, the first job that I ever remember my father having was a boat captain, and it was our own yacht that he had purchased. I think probably a little bit on a whim. It's sort of in character with how my parents did many things. But so he owned this big, beautiful yacht and would charter it out. So he was the captain and would take it all over, the Caribbean and around California and all sorts of things. And so as a family, it was really an integral part of my very young childhood was growing up on this boat.
And you were a buy a yacht on a whim kind of family, were you?
We were a do a lot of things on a whim. My parents were bold decision makers and very much went with their gut on a lot of things. And so we ended up having a lot of adventure in our childhoods for sure.
And how was it living on the boat? Was it unusual, or was it just what you were used to because you were 4 or so at this time, right?
Yes, I was 4 and we had the boat until I was 9. So we did live on it as our residence when I was about 4 and 5. So it felt normal to me. It felt a little bit like a playground all the time. So there were certain, of course, safety protocols that we always followed, but in general, it was a pretty free and fun adventure, I suppose, as a family to be experiencing.
I think of times when I've been on a boat for more than a couple of days, and when I get off and I'm on dry land, it takes me a while to not feel like I'm moving. After living on a boat for a while, you must have felt funny walking around.
I don't remember those sensations. I certainly do as an adult. I recognize the whole sea legs phenomenon, but yeah, I mean, it was the days before we were in school. I have several older sisters and brothers, but my middle sister is very close in age to me, so it was really the two of us a lot of the time, sort of gallivanting around and having adventures, on and off the boat. But I don't remember. I remember getting seasick. I do remember that vividly, and it affected my ability to consume Swiss cheese for my entire life because I got super super seasick on a
So,
Swiss cheese sandwich.
a professional disability for you,
Yes, it
rooted in
is. It's
childhood trauma.
truly, I cannot. It's so ingrained in me that even when I smell like, American style Swiss cheese, it turns me off instantly. I almost can't consume it.
Huh. A couple of years ago, I actually went to Gruyere, where the famous cheese is made, and
Yes. Well, that's
very
the good that I don't have a problem with. It's like that American kind,
American Swiss cheese. Yeah,
the knockoff Swiss cheese here that we
it's kind
get.
of weird. Yeah. So when you were on the boat, home was Pasadena when you were little. Is that right? Southern
I was
California.
born in Pasadena, and my parents had previously lived in Los Feliz, is where my sister was born, and then I was born in Pasadena, and then the boat was docked in San Diego. So I guess that would have been our
Sure.
residence at
Yeah.
that time, our port exactly.
What other things did your parents do when you were little? Your mother went to medical school kind of relatively late in life. Is that right?
She did. So my mother was a homemaker until I was about 4, I think maybe 5. And I remember one day saying, oh, or hearing, Mom's going to go to medical school. And we were all like, what does that even mean? And certainly at that time, having a mother who went to medical school was really anathema. I mean, it was like, your mom's going to do what? It just was so odd. And she was in her 30s at that time. So I think she was about 35. And so the idea of this homemaker going to medical school. So I think we all kind of just went along for the ride, as was so often the experience of my young childhood. And she took some sort of supplemental courses that she needed to take to get into medical school, and she got into medical school in at the Medical College of Georgia in Augusta. And so that was the impetus for our entire family moving at that point. My parents brought the boat around through the Panama Canal, and my sister and I were too young, so we were left with our grandparents. And we met them in Georgia, and my mom started medical school in Atlanta. I'm sorry, in Augusta, Georgia.
A lot of people have to do a lot of complicated things when they want to go to graduate school, particularly if they have families, but most of them don't involve the Panama Canal.
Correct. That is correct. Yes, and there's a lot of wonderful stories from that trip. And I still remember, I mean, they were gone for like 6 weeks. I mean, it was a huge thing that they did, taking that boat through. And being, 5 years old and not seeing your parents for 6 weeks. I remember that being like really lengthy time to be separated from them. But I don't know, I guess the reunion was great. And then suddenly we lived in Georgia. So there you go.
Everything seems like a long time when you're little like that.
It does. It
So your
does.
mother ended up practicing medicine then later?
She did. So she graduated from Medical College of Georgia, and then she did an internship in Birmingham and a residency in Chicago and a fellowship in Baltimore. And then she was a pretty specific specialist. And so then she had her own private practice where she settled in Louisville. And so we moved just so many times as a kid, and then we finally landed in Louisville, Kentucky, which is where I was able to amazingly go to 3 consecutive years in one school, which was
So
unheard of to that point.
when people talk about medical education in Baltimore, that usually means Hopkins. Is that where your mother was at that point,
She
or
was. She was, yes.
and what was her specialization?
So she was a pediatric ophthalmologist,
I
so a
see.
children's eye surgeon. So yeah, she had a really cool job and helped a lot of kids in amazing ways.
That must have been very rewarding in lots of ways.
It was.
Out of the places you lived when you were little, which ones were your favorites?
I loved living in Chicago. So Chicago, I would say, was the first place because we live. It sounds a little silly, like we lived in the same house there for 3 years, and so
Mm-hmm.
like it was the first for me where I felt like I had roots and like I went back to the same school in a second year. So the number of times that I was like that, like poor kid with the lunch tray on the first day of school, like so many times in the middle of the year, at the end of the year, and just like praying that somebody would be like, "Oh, come sit with us." And so to me, getting to return to a school in multiple years was just this amazing gift. And we lived in this really cool neighborhood in Chicago that was really close to the lake, and it was just a really idyllic kind of childhood to have for those few years.
What was your father doing while your mother was in medical school?
So he still had the boat at that point. So we didn't see our parents a whole lot for a number of years there because he would often be on trips on the boat and my mom would be in school. And so, again, I have older siblings. And so I think that helped a lot. But yeah, my dad for quite a while until I was 9, he had the boat, and then the boat sank, of course, because that's what boats do. So the boat sank and then he was home. And after that, he really helped my mom do everything that she did, finish her schooling. He supported her in all of her various academic pursuits and setting up her practice, and was really her partner in that endeavor. And that's what they did for many, many years.
And where were you living when you graduated from high school?
I graduated from high school in Louisville,
Louisville.
Kentucky. So I went there sophomore through senior year.
And then back to Chicago.
Well, I took a year off in between high school and college. So I went to live in Israel for a year on a
Oh, right. I
kibbutz.
forgot about that part. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did that for a year before I started college. And then when I
You were
returned from that,
dairy farming. Is that right?
I did. Yeah. I milked cows for a year. No connection to the cheese industry. Like people will often ask me that. Oh, were you like inspired? And no, not really. Milking cows in a dairy is not hugely inspiring
What
work
was
in the ways
kibbutz
that you
life
might
like?
think. What's that?
What was kibbutz life like?
Oh, just fabulous. It was just amazing. I was there with friends, and it was this amazing culture of sharing and hard work and sort of personal accountability and personal agency. And uh, it was a freedom loving person's dream, right? Because it was all about your own grit and being recognized for that and being able to participate on an equal level with the locals. And it was just an amazing, amazing opportunity.
Yeah, I'm interested in that experience because it speaks to something about the dual nature of work that we have. So people really enjoy these, kind of idealistic, often experiences that often involve a kind of deprivation, lots of hard work, typically uncomfortable living
Hmm.
situations. But you're young, you're with friends, and there's a sense of meaning that comes along with it. On the other hand, for the most part, these are not very good economic models. There's however you're going to organize the next great $1 trillion American company, it's not going to be on the kibbutz model probably.
Correct.
And
Small
so we've
scale is
got,
great.
yeah, so we've got two, kind of separate things going on there. And I wonder how you have weighted those at various parts of your life of the economically more efficient forms of production that tend to be more financially rewarding, and the I really love doing this, and I have a sense of idealism and purpose and mission.
Well, I think my own career is, I would say, is really kind of an illustration of that. So when I started work in earnest as an adult after college, it was absolutely the safe, financially beneficial, traditional track. So it was in technology. It's a very lucrative field, especially back then. It was a very lucrative choice to have made, and it was again more traditional, I suppose, and especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, working in technology was the way to go.
What year did
And
you finish college?
I'm sorry,
What year did you finish college?
I graduated college in 1998.
That was a good time to be getting out of the University of Chicago with a technology career.
It was. So we were the first, I believe, the first computer science concentration graduating class coming out of University of Chicago. So when I started that program, it was brand new. And so I'm pretty sure that we were the first class that was able to graduate with a computer science degree from there. University of Chicago is very economics based,
Mhm.
philosophical, religious based, language based. Like, so computer science was a little bit of a new thing for them, and it was a super cool thing to be kind of helping to build that program just a little bit. So when I graduated from there, I instantly moved to Northern Virginia, which was at that point an East Coast real hub for software development, and got in with a really cool opportunity here, which was with a really bold, brave, fun company called MicroStrategy. And they had a subsidiary called strategy.com, which was kind of instead of being business to business, it was more business to consumer. It was all about sharing intelligence with the average Joe about their investment portfolios, about the weather, all of these things. So it was really, really cool and really innovative stuff. And so I went to work for them as a software developer. And that path was, again, the very safe, wonderful, the payoff path, right? It was like I did this thing at University of Chicago and I went and worked in technology. It's going to really pay off. And then by various twists and turns, my actual lifelong, I guess I can say at this point, I'm old enough to have like a lifelong career, but I'd say now my lifelong career has definitely been the less financially rewarding slash traditional path, but one that I find is much more personally rewarding. So when you spoke about that balance with kibbutz life, and is that a financial model that's you know good? Um, I sort of I lived that transition of going from this lucrative thing to not as much.
Yeah. The story of how you first got interested in computer programming is interesting. Tell
Mhm.
us about
So when I was in college, I believe I was a sophomore in college, and I always worked throughout college, just very, worked in a cafe or whatever. And there was this really cool job posting of a gentleman looking for an assistant, and he was an attorney and he was blind. And so he was looking for somebody who could be his assistant in many ways, not only in sort of daily functioning and operations, but doing his legal work as well. And you have to remember that back at this time, this would have been in, I don't know, 1996 ish. The technologies that we take for granted just did not exist then. So all of this speech to text, all of this transcriptions, it really didn't exist for the most part. So he needed a lot of support to get his work done. So I went to work for him as when he was the attorney. And during that time, he said, "Hey, there's this whole new world exploding right now, this software world, and people are writing their own software. And so this idea, this is right when PCs were really starting to be something that the average person could afford to have in their home. And he said people are building their own software on these things. And it was this really cool concept. And he's like, I want to build a software thing. And here's what I want it to do. And I want to leave my practice, and this is what I want to invest in. So he was like this teeny tiny little startup, right? It was him and me eventually. So I learned how to code. We used a language back then called Fox Pro, which was this
Mm.
object-oriented database-ish type language. And I taught myself Fox Pro enough to start building this prototype for this software package that he had in mind. And that was my first exposure to like
What
the
was the software supposed to do?
it was supposed to do facilities management.
I
So
see.
it would enable someone like a maintenance person to have a reader on their belt that they could walk around and scan barcodes so that the managers of the property, for instance, would know that certain things were being maintained and overseen. So it was kind of a location checking, task checking kind of thing, but it was connected to this hardware that the individual would wear on their belt, like a little
Mm.
scanner. Um, so again, back then, this was all like, what? You have this little scanner? You can carry that on you? I mean, this was before, I think this was before cell phones. Like nobody had a cell phone then. It's all kind of mushing together at this point, but it was early, needless to say, in this world. So yeah, so we started doing this software thing, and then I decided to leave school temporarily so that I could work with him to do this full time. And amazingly, my parents were like, "That's awesome, go for it." Which still to this day, as a parent of three children myself now, if my daughter came to me and said, "Hey, mom, you like worked your butt off to send me to this really prestigious college, and I'm just going to take some time off and go and like work with this guy on software package," I think I would have a hard time.
Well, from what I've heard about your parents, that sounds like it's in character for them, though.
Yes, it was absolutely in character for them, and still, I think I remember it surprising me even then. But they were so like, "That's really cool, and we support you doing that. So go for it."
So how'd that work out?
It worked out okay. So we worked pretty closely together, and it just kind of fizzled out for various reasons. It just lost momentum, and I could tell it was petering out. He was getting distracted, and it wasn't. I could tell it was not going to go in the direction that I had hoped, and be enough of a reason for me not to be in college anymore. So I returned. I think I took a year and some off, a year and a half maybe, and so I returned to college in my junior year, and then graduated a year and a half later.
Gotcha. And graduated with a
Computer science.
degree in computer science.
Yes, yeah.
You're a minor?
I did not have a minor. No.
Gotcha.
And yeah, at University of Chicago, they call them concentrations. And I don't even know that if you might be able to do dual concentrations. I have no idea. I certainly did not do one. My plate was very, very full to get in all of my comp sci courses in a year and a half. It was crazy.
And Chicago is a school with a very particular kind of intellectual reputation.
Yes.
And so did you get up to your ears in Milton Friedman and all that stuff while you were in college, or were you more on the leaning into the techie stuff?
Leaning into the techie stuff for sure. So in my first couple of years, it was like two different lives there for me. In my first couple of years, I really dabbled. I mean, I thought I was going to go to medical school, so I started taking a lot of science courses, and then realized that is not for me. So then I shifted to anthropology. I was like, oh, that's fascinating. So I did that. And then that kind of lost its luster. And then I shifted to pre-law. There was this really cool concentration there called Law, Letters, and Society.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did
Famous
that for a
program.
little while. What's that?
The famous program.
Yes. Oh, it is. I had no idea. Well, then it just seemed really cool. And so I tried that for a while. And then that's right when I took off the time to go and do this software thing. So once I returned, it was a whole different life. So the first 2 years were really like finding my interest, taking a bunch of different courses. The final year and a half that I was in college was all about pedal to the metal. Like I've got to take all my science courses, all my math courses, all my computer science courses in literally a year and a half. And
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't um, take as advantage of the other things that were probably floating all around me. And I'll be honest, I don't even think I knew who Milton Friedman was until I was an adult. I know it's embarrassing, right? Like, and now he's one of my great idols, but back then I didn't walk around like, oh, this is the hallowed halls of these amazing economists. It did not really resonate with me then.
So you squeezed it all into the last 3 semesters or so.
Yes. Yeah.
Hmm. I think I still owe the University of Texas the undergraduate writing seminar they want me to take still,
Oh
and
my goodness.
which I've taught at other colleges, but never mind that for now.
Right, right,
And
right.
so you get into the technology business in Northern Virginia,
Correct.
but you've had some other jobs along the way. You said you worked at a family-owned restaurant for a
Mhm.
while,
Yep.
and some other things along those lines. And what are you doing in the technology business after MicroStrategies or during MicroStrategies?
Right. So at MicroStrategy, I worked again for a subsidiary they had called strategy.com, and I was coding to start with. So it was just, long hours, but super fun, great group of people, super smart people, people who really did feel excited about what they were doing. And so I did that and then started to manage other teams. So I think someone saw something in me at that point that was like, oh, you would do great leading these teams. And I really enjoyed that. And so I took those opportunities as well. So when strategy.com closed in 2001, as many technology companies did at that point, MicroStrategy really kind of clamped down and eliminated a bunch of their subsidiaries. So I was like jobless at that point. But the last job I had with them was managing other software developers, which
Gotcha.
was really fun.
And then somehow, somewhere along the way, uh, cheese.
Yes, it's one serendipitous encounter after another. So I was in the autumn of 2021 is when strategy.com closed down, and I was just about to get married. I got married in October of that year. And so I was like,
I think you meant 2001,
what did I say? Yes.
2021, I think you
Oh my
said.
goodness, yes. No, 2001. Thank you. So in 2001, I got married to my husband, and that was in October of that year, right after 9/11. So it was just this huge whirlwind time, I remember. And so got married, and I said, oh, let's just do our honeymoon and come back, and then I'll find a job when we get back. And my brother-in-law, so this is my oldest sister's husband, owned a food importation and distribution company. So basically, he brought foods in from all over the place and sold them to chefs. And his company was started by his father in the Bronx, New York. And they were in the process of expanding down on the kind of the Eastern Seaboard, coming down to DC. And he's like, I need people to help me grow this business down there. You've never done direct sales before. It's something that will benefit you your entire life. You love food. Come help me do this. And I was like, okay, sounds good. And so I went to work in food sales, and that was the first time that I ever learned about food as business. So I'd obviously, we grew up literally never cooking at home, ever, not ever. We would eat out breakfast, lunch, and dinner every single day, and I do not exaggerate when I say that. So the idea of like really understanding where your food came from was this amazing revelation for me when I went to work at this company, learning about the people that produce it, how they grow it, how they make it, how they pack it and ship it and distribute it. It just was a miracle to me to learn about. And one of the things that was so significant in that experience was people wanting to learn about cheese. So I would sell cheese, of course. I learned all about cheese, and it was fun, but that was the thing that people wanted to talk about. So the chefs that I worked with, it was always, hey, will you come in and teach my staff a cheese class? Will you come in and teach a cheese class to my customers? And it's something that I just heard so many times. I was like, wow, people are really into cheese, and chefs are always very cutting edge. So kind of like what the chefs are doing now is what everyone else is going to be doing, in a little while. And they were onto something for sure.
So if you want to learn about computer programming, you go to the University of Chicago and you enroll in a computer programming course. How do you
Correct.
go about getting a cheese education?
Read a lot of books. Read a lot of books. And back
What's
then,
the one book everyone needs to read about cheese?
oh, well, I would say back then, I think it's probably still the same because it's such a go-to, is The Cheese Primer by Steve Jenkins, who was the gentleman who built the cheese program at a market in New York called Fairway. And they were still have this unbelievable cheese program. So there are so many cheese books out there now, but when I was doing this over 20 years ago, there were like four, and you read Steve Jenkins, and that's how you learned about where cheese came from and how it worked. And then, like so many things in my career subsequent to that, um, I just did a lot of trial and error, and I'm sure reinventing so many wheels that did not need to be reinvented. But yeah, so that was that. I would say that's my go-to. That's my
So you
go-to
got your
book. But there
PhD in
wasn't a lot.
cheese.
What's that?
So you got your PhD in cheese.
I got my self acquired PhD in cheese. I did. I did a ton of reading, a ton of tasting, and I did go and I reached out to a person who had a cheese shop similar to what I wanted to do in Chicago. And so I went to Chicago and I worked with him for a little while, like a day. I mean, not long. And he showed me so many things. And so that was a huge lesson of like just the logistics of running a cheese shop.
So
So it was really cool.
what was one of the things he showed you?
So really silly things like here's the best way to wrap a cheese. Here's the
Why,
best
why would that be
slicer,
silly?
because the aesthetics of how you present these things is really, really important. And to this day, glass wrapping, as I call it, of cheeses is a critical sort of formative part of our training cheese steak, because the cheese should not look like it's wrapped. It should look like it's just sitting there naked, and that's how good the wrapping should be. And it's a
That's
just
why
a
you call it glass wrapping because it looks like it's
mhm.
clear. I
Yeah,
see.
yeah. It's a
Well, I don't think you should I don't think you should be too modest about the aesthetic end of this. I mean, if we didn't care about the aesthetic qualities of this stuff, there wouldn't be any need for fancy cheese boutiques. We would all just have protein shakes every day
true,
or
true,
whatever. We would
very
have just
true.
take multivitamins and eat spinach, I guess, or whatever you're supposed to eat when you're actually I like spinach, so maybe that's not a very good example. So you go through this stuff. You learn how to wrap some cheese. You learn
Mm-hmm.
all about cheese. You learn
Mm-hmm.
about cheese customers, which is an
Yes,
important part of the business, of course.
yes.
So, but at this point, you're still not dealing mainly, I assume, with the general public. You're dealing with food professionals.
Correct. So this is right. So at this point, I was at this company called the Chef's Warehouse, which still exists now. They've since gone public, and my brother-in-law is the CEO now. So they're all over the country, and I think even in other countries now. It's crazy, crazy. Anyway, so I was still
A
working
wildly
at
successful business.
wildly, wildly successful, and to still
Well done,
be
brother-in-law.
yeah, I mean, and to still be operated, and he's still the CEO of this little company that his father started selling eggs out of the back of his car, is just miraculous to me. So yes, it has been a true American success story for sure. So I was at this company still, and people kept again asking about cheese. It was really thematic, and so after a while of being there, I knew that this was not going to be my career. I said, you know what? It's been about a year and a half. Like I'm good. I'm good selling flour and butter, and cheese to chefs. I think I want to start my own business. I had always wanted to start my own business as a child. I remember vividly having a dream that one day I would have a cash register, and I don't even remember what I was going to use the cash register for. It's not like I had a vision beyond the cash register, but it was so this that I laughed when I opened my store, that I was like, oh my gosh, I fulfilled my dream that I have a cash register. So I knew I wanted to have my own business, and and I thought it was going to have something to do with food. I live in this great little neighborhood in Alexandria that's I always tell people it's like Beaver Cleaver land. It's Main Street, USA, this place. And I thought people would be really into this kind of thing in Delray, which is my neighborhood. And so I left Chef's Warehouse and I did some technology consulting for a little while I worked on my business plan. So I still had income coming in, but I worked on the business plan for months leading up to opening the shop.
Gotcha. You were just giving me, by the way, flashbacks of a toy cash register I had
Mm-hmm.
when I was a kid, which I did start a business one time, but we didn't make the cash register ring very much, unfortunately. So
Oh,
it was not not
everyone has those days. Don't worry about it.
everyone has those days. Yeah, starting a newspaper in Philadelphia was just a dumb idea, but it was a lot of fun. Uh so you are learning about this stuff and you're branching on your own. And it seems to me what I was thinking is that some years ago, one of my favorite little profiles I ever wrote was for National Review, was about this guy who is a maker of kitchen knives, and he
Mm-hmm.
has a little company called Cut Brooklyn, and he makes just a few knives. and they sell for outrageous sums of money, and he can't keep inventory. Sort of professional chefs just love his stuff. And there's another person I wrote a little bit about also in New York who was a celebrity butcher.
Mm-hmm.
And my father was a butcher at a union store in Borger, Texas, once upon a time. And if you tried to explain to him in 1951 that there would be such a thing as a celebrity butcher, he would have thought you were drunk or something like that. And these kinds of businesses are great, and I'm glad they exist. But it seems to me that they are something that really only exists in a society that has achieved an extraordinary level of prosperity. I've known people who I knew people who made and sold cheese in India once upon a time.
Mm-hmm.
And unless you were operating really at a big industrial scale, it was not something that provided a very good living. It was a very, modest, almost subsistence level way of making a living. Your business is something that you can just absolutely see in Alexandria, Virginia in 2024. But there are many points in history and many places in the world where such a business just wouldn't be possible. And there's something just wonderful about the level of prosperity that we've achieved as a society. That means you can be a celebrity butcher, or you can be someone who makes a really, really good living making a few high-end kitchen knives here and there, that you don't have to be, something like Montgomery Ward in the 1960s
Mm-hmm.
To really make a living. And you don't have to be Walmart or even Whole Foods in the cheese business to have a good business.
That's very true. And I think it's funny because yes, there's certain, I think we think of my type of business, for instance, the local cheese shop, which is actually very expensive and certainly not something that the average income person is going to be visiting very frequently. So it
Yeah.
does take a lot of disposable income. I consider my shop to be a luxury experience
Mhm.
for people. Um, but it is based on a deeply felt nostalgia that Americans have for the time when maybe not even them, but their parents lived in these communities where you did walk downtown to get your goods for the week. You went to the cheese shop, you went to the butcher shop, and those things were pervasive. And there was a time in American history where somebody would make a decent living having a cheese shop or having a salami store or a meat store. You'd have the guy that made the hats and the guy that made the socks, and it was a very shop based economy at one time. And I think there's this again deep nostalgia for that experience of people in this world where you can have anything in 24 hours. And I mean
Yeah.
almost anything in the world you could get in 24 hours. People both embrace that and recoil from that. And I think the success of stores like mine and the knife gentleman that you mentioned are a reflection of that, of this sense that I want a little bit of that old timey experience. I want to work for my cheese, so to speak. I want to have to walk there and wait in line and tell them what I want and taste some stuff. And, maybe it's not wrapped perfectly and maybe it doesn't taste the same as it was last time, or embracing that repeatable, non-consistent shopping experience, for better or worse. So it's sort of a bougie thing now, but that's based on a very average Joe kind of experience that I think was the norm some time ago.
Yeah. Well, that is kind of the definition of the Brooklyn hipster aesthetic, isn't it? It's a
Right.
rich people's version of something that was blue collar 100 years ago.
Exactly. 100%. And whereas I'm a cheesemonger, you got your fishmonger, you got your meat guy, your butcher. But those things are not easy businesses to run, especially in this day and age where you can't just know cheese and sell cheese. You have to know everything to run a business like mine now.
Of course.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
Yeah, you just made me think of something that until fairly recently, my family lived in Dallas, and Dallas
Mhm.
is a great big city, and being able to get Amazon same day delivery of lots of things was great because we have four little kids, and so just being able to get stuff there immediately, and then we moved to a small town in a kind of rural area. And this the biggest change was now some things take 2 or 3 days to get from Amazon. Now, historically speaking, that's still awfully convenient compared to what people used to have to go through. But it's remarkable how quickly you get used to, oh, we can get this here by 8 o'clock this evening if we order it right now. But high end cheese is not that way. It takes time to make cheese.
It does. It takes a lot of time, and you talk about hard work and precise work. It's very, very challenging to produce good cheese for sure.
Tell me about the back end of the cheese business. So if I'm buying some chunk of a very expensive cheese from your shop, what does the industry look like before the point that it gets to you?
Well, as we say, every cheese has a story. And the thing about cheesemakers is they're very hardworking and very sort of diversified in their skill set. So it's kind of neat what they have to do to get the cheese to your door. So you have different types of cheesemakers, some of whom are what we call farmstead cheesemakers. So these are people who raise the animals, care for the animals, feed them, milk them, and then turn the milk into cheese. And this is one cheesemaker out of 100 is actually a farmstead cheesemaker because it takes two very different skill sets. One is animal husbandry, and one is the precision and sort of scientific thinking of cheese making, which is very chemically based and very precise. So to have somebody who can do both of those things, who wants to both be up to their knees in poop, for lack of a better word, and be caring for animals and birthing them and raising them and feeding them and all of that, but who also can be essentially in a lab environment making a cheese. It's not real common. So those are the people that I admire most because they're the ones who really have gone all in on this. I want to understand how my product is made. I want to make sure that I have control over the entire process and the quality thereof. So it's really neat. So you have people like that. You also have people who will purchase milk from farmers that they trust. So maybe they're not raising the animals, but they work with a farm right next door and they get the milk from them. And they get the milk and then they make the cheese. They age the cheese for some period of time, depending on what they're making. Then they have to package the cheese. And then they either hand deliver the cheese to whomever is going to sell it, or they partner with somebody who delivers it for them. So this can be a small company, a large company, but it's somebody who will take the goods from the producer, safely transport them to some end destination, and hand them off to someone else who then hopefully treats the product with the care and love that the producer would hope.
But how do you go about tracking down inventory? So let's say you're looking at your offerings one day and you say, I've got a real weak spot on this kind of cheese. I was going to think of some example, but I couldn't think of anything that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
immediately going to sound silly and stupid. So
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave it to you to think of the example of something you go looking for. How do you say, I need to find a cheese guy for this? I need to find a homestead farmer or somebody else who can provide this. What does the market intelligence look like?
Right. So an example I would say would be me standing in front of the cheese case and saying, hey, Virginia and Maryland make a decent amount of cheese. We don't have many from Virginia and Maryland right now, which obviously as a shop in Virginia, you would say, okay, let's fill that hole a little bit. So once we say that, I would either reach out to farms directly who are here. If they don't have a distribution partner, I would reach out directly to them and say, hey, would you ship your cheeses to me? And most of the time they'll say yes. The problem with cheese is it's extraordinarily perishable, especially in the hot climate where we live. So shipping on your average shipment of cheese, which is both heavy and perishable, is extraordinarily expensive. And so this is a real deficit for those small farmers that don't have distributing partners because who's going to pay that, right? Who's going to pay? Okay, my cheese is $100, but the shipping is $150, right? So how can I possibly get someone to want to spend that kind of money? So we try and work with cheesemakers who can send us stuff directly. And if not, we hope that they have a distribution partner. And that's getting more and more common now, even small distribution partners where you can have them bring you stuff from a number of different farms. And it's just a big benefit to everyone. So
So
it
somebody
depends.
out there is the guy for some particular kind of cheese, and somebody out there is going to be like the cheese distribution guy.
Exactly. So there are certain cheese centric distributors who that's what they do. So they find these little guys, they help them get supply chain set up, they get their product, they put it on one truck, and they deliver 50 different kinds of cheese to me in one delivery. And it can be cheeses from Virginia and Maryland and Vermont and California and Switzerland and Spain. And it all comes on one truck and boom, there you go. And it's in great condition, all of that good stuff.
It's the miracle of specialization and division of labor.
For sure.
How
For
does
sure.
cheese get here from Switzerland? Is it flown?
Two ways. So more delicate cheeses, they will typically do air freight.
Mm-hmm.
But that again is going to be reflected in the cost of those cheeses. And this is one of the reasons why little soft cheeses tend to be so expensive, is because they typically have to be air shipped. But you can also do actual freight boat. So they'll put them on a boat and ship them over. That takes longer. But of course, there's temperature control and everything. It's not like they're just putting them on the deck and hoping for the best. But yeah, so then there's boats that will actually bring them over, which take longer period of time.
Gotcha. So, how much of your business is thinking about cheese, and how much of your business is thinking about everything else you have to do in life so you can sell cheese?
I would say, much to my chagrin, I would say probably 10 to 15% of my time is spent on the product, and probably 80+% is spent on running my business.
And what are the hardest challenges of running your business?
I would say there's so many challenges. I would say one of them is kind of an overarching challenge. And I think that is the nature of having a business like mine, where I'm very involved in it, is everything that I have to know how to do.
Mm-hmm.
So literally my day will go from going in early to meet the air conditioner service guy to fix the air conditioner because it's not working. And then it will be, oh, I've got to unclog this faucet over here, and I know how to do that, so I'll just go and fix this faucet. And then it's, oh, this doesn't look right. Let me make a note to pass this on to the team and say that that we can't have things looking like that. And then it's meetings with the team, and then it's planning future events. We do a lot of programming, so lots of really cool events and classes and wine tastings and winemaker events. And so there's a lot of time that goes into all of those events. And then just making sure that my team has everything that they need to get their job done, because I have a ton of employees. That's one thing about the restaurant and retail business, is it's very employee intensive.
Yeah. And very employee intensive for you in a market where labor's not cheap. So I
Correct.
wonder how you think about your risk profile of your business, because you operate in a place that has just an extraordinarily high cost of living and doing business. It's one of the more expensive places in the country, and I would have to imagine that when there are economic contractions or downturns or uncertainty, like the fancy cheese might be one of the first things people cut from their spending.
Yes and no. So we live in a very expensive area. That is true. And I have a type of business that would typically be very reactive to downturns and things like that. One of the things that I think is worth mentioning is that so many of the people employed in our region are employed by the federal government. So the government never sleeps. It never dies. It never shrinks. Again, much to my chagrin, it tends to just grow and grow and grow happily. And the people that work for the government feel very few of those contractions, to be honest. So yes,
So
there's
you're
this would
recession proofed by Leviathan.
right. They're recession proofed by everyone else continuing to pay the government money so
Yeah.
that they can be employed. So just think about what the people do in this area is it's very government. They get paid a lot of money and it's very consistent pay. So that's great for a business like mine, because it means when there are downturns that would really affect people living in Wisconsin or even California, other parts of the country that are not this special place, there would be a lot more kind of up and down. We see relatively little influence from things like that here.
What I'd like you to do is think about some of the previous jobs you've held over the years, from the sort of humble ones to the more lucrative ones, and tell me how those contributed to what you're doing now. Things you learned in those other jobs that have been maybe surprisingly important to what you do now.
I would say learning about technology and how technology works has made me a better business owner. So having that background in computer science and being in that world has made me better at what I do. And it's made me more eager to pursue new technologies to execute my work, new technologies to make my business run smoother, and having enough understanding of it and kind of the wherewithal to implement those things myself and train others on how to do them and fix them when they break. So I feel a little bit less helpless, I think, in terms of technology. I think there's a lot of confusion about technology and a lot of fear of it. So I feel very comfortable with it. And I think that's one thing that I would say I took from my technology background and brought to this otherwise very different type of work, but it's eliminated that one area of discomfort would be understanding how technology
Mm-hmm.
works.
What about your other jobs?
I would say anytime I'd ever had a food service job, it is something that I advise every human being to do at a point in their life. I cannot stress that enough. There is something very, very unique about being in the service industry, the hospitality industry, where you are providing an experience to hundreds of people every day, and having to do that with a smile on your face and acting like when that person walked in the door, it's the best thing that happened to you all day long, right? Those are really vital lessons for people. It's vital for them to understand how hard it is to be on that stage and to provide experiences for people, and many of them for short periods of time. Okay, we're not
Yes.
talking about long time loyal engagements with large customers for extended periods. We're talking about you got these people for 90 minutes. You got them for 90 minutes and you got to thrill them. And with everyone that you don't thrill, there's that fear. Where's the backlash, right? Like what's going to happen? Oh, this person didn't have a good experience. And then you're waiting. You're like, oh, what am I going to see from this? And so it's a really critical thing to do. And so I did that when I was in high school, is when I first had my kind of like waiting on people at a counter kind of job. And I did some of that through college as well. So I would say anytime you can have a service experience, it makes you both a better employee in any industry, but it makes you a better customer. I think if everyone were to work in that industry, they would approach those who work in that industry with a greater level of appreciation for the hard work that goes into providing those experiences for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a great deal of value in those kinds of jobs. I've often thought that there are priests out there who hear confessions all day and think that they've heard the worst that the human species has to offer, but the people who clean hotel rooms
I
know
don't even like to think about that. Oh my gosh, I know. Every time
a
I
lot
leave a
more about.
hotel room when I stay there, I'm like, okay, I need it to look like I'm a thoughtful, caring person. I'm going to pull the bed up. I'm going to pile all my towels together in one pile. I'm not going to leave my hair anywhere. Like I try because I know they're going to come in and go, oh God, just So yes, people who clean hotel rooms, I just adore them. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's I don't know that it's the worst job there is, but it's certainly a job that exposes you to some of the worst human behavior and the worst just the most animalistic side
Hmm.
of human life, I think.
Hmm.
What are the aspects of your job that are the least rewarding? The things that I have to do this thing because I'm the owner of the business, and so it has to be me that does this, but I really wish I could get someone else to do it.
I would say all of the kind of the bureaucratic stuff that you have to go through to own a business like mine. It would cripple most people if they saw the extent of bureaucratic stuff that needs to be accomplished on a routine basis by your typical small business owner,
Mm.
especially if you're in the food industry. So every government agency, from federal ones all the way down to the most local, have a piece of you and can inspect you at any time at random, and can really make things hard for you if things don't go well. There's so many forms that you have to submit and licenses that you have to renew and permits that you have to renew and taxes that you have to pay on equipment that you own. And there's a lot of things about owning a small business. And I would say they have to be done by me, because if you slip on any of them, it's serious business.
Yeah.
So it's not the kind of thing where you can go, oh, you forgot to pay that. That's okay. Lesson for next time. I mean, it's like a big deal if you don't renew your ABC license, right? ABC, I'm sorry, is our local government
Alcoholic beverage
alcohol.
commission.
Yes, alcohol beverage. So those are very big deals that can have a huge impact to the business. So those are the things that I have to do, and I do it with great unhappiness the whole
It
time.
even occurred to me that you must have a liquor license because you're surely serving wine.
Yes, so we have a full liquor license where we have every liquor license essentially because we're both a retail store and a restaurant. So we have the license that allows you to sell hard liquor in the restaurant, so make cocktails and whatnot, but also to sell wine and beer for consuming on premises. So you sit down at a restaurant, you order a glass of wine. But because we have the retail store, we have an off premises license as well. So that enables people to come in and purchase wine and leave the store like with bottles of wine, which
Yeah.
most restaurants do not have that license.
Managing liquor licenses would be just a full-time job on its own.
It's almost like that. And then you want to make sure that all of your staff is trained and that they all have their ABC training and they know what the right thing to do is. And they all have to have their food management card so that if you get a health inspection, there's somebody there that has their food manager card. And it's lots and lots of certifications and, again, permits and licenses and things like that that are involved.
Does your family get tired of cheese experiments at dinner at home or anything like that?
Never.
Do you feel judged? Can you make Kraft macaroni and cheese at home, or is that going to be on the front page of Cheese News in the morning and you're going to be ruined?
I do. I do make, we even have the ones that you put in the microwave. So it's like a step below that. It's not even
Wow,
stovetop. We have those little,
that's
you know,
barely even fit for human consumption.
I know, but whatever. Kids like it. They eat it once in a while. It's cool. But I would say they never tire of trying cheese, and learning about it. I think what I would say what they tire of is my husband and I talking about work at home. That
Yeah,
I think they could do without. But as far as me bringing my work home in a cheese sense, they're all about that. Like they love to be involved in that and taste things and give feedback. And as they get older, we ask for feedback from them on more and more things, which I think they really enjoy. So everything from what do you think of this cheese to, hey, this is a new sort of Instagram campaign we're going to do. Like my older daughters, I'm like, what do you think of that? How does that look? And they're like, oh my God, that's so uncool. You can't do that. Or that's wicked embarrassing. You can't do that. Or that's cringy. My favorite word of
yeah.
teenage girls. Yes. Do you get the cringy word at home ever?
Uh, my oldest son just turned 2, and I've got newborns also. So my kids aren't saying anything right now very
Oh
much.
my goodness. Well, you'll be there soon enough. You'll be
Yeah,
in
so
in
I've got a
voc-
2-year-old boy, then I've got
vocabulary.
identical triplets who are little kids, and yeah, that's
I'm sorry, you
those
can't.
of you
My
who are listening
face
to the
has just
audio
fallen
can't
off
see the
of my
face.
body.
Yeah, yep.
Congratulations and
Thanks very much.
wow.
Yeah, they're
Oh,
yeah, they were born in early in the year, so they're just a
oh
few
my
months.
goodness. So they're brand new. Oh,
Yeah, brand
that's
new little
awesome.
kids. So I was just thinking though about the Kraft macaroni and cheese thing. So my
Mhm.
wife spent significant part of her childhood in Switzerland, and she's got pretty strong opinions about fancy cheese. But Kraft macaroni and cheese is one of her favorite things in the world.
Mhm.
So that's okay.
I say eat it
There's room
without
for both in the
apology.
market.
There's room for all of it. So,
There's room
yeah,
for both things in the market.
indeed.
What would be the most surprising thing about your business for people who don't know much about businesses like this? If I'm a lawyer and all I've ever done is work in law offices, and I know about billable hours and hiring people and firing people and checking credentials and reading resumes, all your basic kind of business stuff. But I'm talking to you. What am I going to learn about your business that it's going to make me clutch my head and say I never thought about that?
I would say somebody coming from, for lack of a better term, the white collar world is the understanding that the industry in which I work is very much a blue collar industry, and it
Mm-hmm.
has different challenges. We have different types of people that work for us. Everyone from kids just out of college and adults, all the way to new immigrants who don't speak English, to everything possible in between. So I think they would be surprised at the amazing variety of humanity that makes their experiences happen for them. It's not just that kid waiting on your table or the person behind the counter. It's this army of amazing and varied individuals that all have different requirements and needs as employees. And I think they would be surprised at that, because when, again, that's not to say that there's not some variety in a white collar industry, but typically the people that you're working with are kind of like yourself, or they want to be like you, and they're striving for the same thing and have a similar background. So I would say this industry is much more one that is like a human adventure, to kind of interact with so many different types of people. That's kind of unique.
Can you give me an example of a sort of person you've interacted with that was surprising or colorful or interesting?
Oh my gosh.
I didn't see that coming.
That's a tough one. I would say, oh my gosh, so many people. Yeah, I guess there's one person who works with me right now who has like blown my mind, because he started with us as just a part-time cheesemonger, and waited on some tables, and was just a really like an unbelievable employee. And I didn't know much about him other than, if I knew that Ricky was working, I was like, all is going to be good. Like, Ricky's there, he's got it, right? And so then one day I sit down with Ricky and he starts to tell me about his background. And it turns out that he's got this amazing management background, in exactly our industry, but had never kind of talked about that and did not want to manage with us, and was just the best employee you could ever ask for. And needless to say, I have since strong armed him into becoming a leader, at Cheese Teak, because he's that special and wonderful. But I would say that's one of the times more recently where I've really been surprised in a good way. And
Yeah.
then you have not good surprises, people that you really trusted doing things that you're like, you can't believe that that person did that thing, and you have to let them go over it, and it's sad and horrible and whatever. Those are some surprises that you get also, but I prefer the Ricky level surprises, and not the other ones. But yeah, it kind of blew my mind that he had so much experience.
Something you just mentioned, I've always found firing people very difficult. I mean, I've been fired many times, as people who listen to this podcast know, sometimes very publicly. Um, and while it's no fun to get fired, it's kind of an emotionally hard thing to fire somebody. It is for me anyway. I mean, it has to be
It
done from time to time, but
Yeah, so I would say I run my business whereby if I let someone go, they needed letting go.
yeah.
So there's, I feel less bad, so to speak. It's never a comfortable conversation. You're never like, oh yes, I get to go and have this really like terrible conversation with this person. But the way that we've structured things is to really, we try and hire well, but you don't always hire well. And sometimes you get people that don't work out. But typically giving them opportunities to discover that they're not working out themselves, and then they will gracefully exit, as opposed, so if I'm really like, hey, you're done, you're out of here, take your stuff and go, it has not happened that often. And it's usually you're happy to do it because you're like, shame on you for doing what you
Putting
did
me in
that
this
had me
position. Yeah.
have to have this conversation with you. But yeah, it's never fun. You never want to impact somebody's income, and people have families and all of this. So I try to do it as rarely as possible.
Yeah.
Frankly, no, it's never fun.
Well, recruiting must be sort of interesting in your business because, these highly specialized, very focused businesses like yours, you're looking for maniacs, right? I mean, you're looking for people who are willing to take an obsessive interest in the
Mm-hmm.
quality and story and history and the literature of this one particular product that most people who aren't sort of aficionados don't really think about all that much. It's not like you're running, Target. If I get my MBA from the University of Chicago and Target recruits me, I kind of know what I'm going to do. And Target can hire 500 people a year, 5,000 people a year, or whatever they need to fit these roles. But you're looking for people who are going to be a little bit cracked in some ways, and there's a lot that comes along with that.
Particularly on the cheese side of things. So somebody who wants to be surrounded by cheese and, you know, talk to people about it and portion it and weigh it and wrap it up and stuff, that's a unique personality. And it's a little bit easier to hire on the restaurant side for people who are waiters and waitresses and
Sure.
hosts and whatnot. But yes, the specialized knowledge, it takes a special person. And very often somebody who's very interested in a niche product like that is not going to always be a great salesperson. So you have to choose very carefully, especially for the retail side, because you want someone who's into it enough and yet can still really charm customers when they come in and give them a great time and understand the spirit of what we're doing here. It's not just you knowing about cheese. It's about you sharing that knowledge in a graceful way with the folks who visit us. So I would say that is a more difficult hiring exercise. But what we do kind of as a rule is I hire for personality, and then I teach them what they need to know. So the odds of me finding someone who's like a cheese expert who wants to come and work for me and is awesome, very, very slim. I mean, you talk about a very precise market. They're not growing on trees. So for the most part, I'm hiring people that don't know sometimes anything about cheese, but I'm okay with that. Like I want someone who knows that they should smile when someone walks in the door, and if they see someone struggling to pick up their case of wine, that will say, "Oh, let me get that for you. Where is your car?" I can't teach people that. I can't teach people to smile and to be bubbly and to be helpful and to want to share information. I can teach them the difference between cheddar and Gruyere. So I think hiring for the personality and the vibe that you're going for makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah. No, as people familiar with my work can tell you, warm and fuzzy personalities don't just come naturally to a lot of people, and
They do not.
they have to be at times cultivated. Have you ever heard Keith Richards talk about cheese?
I have not, but I adore Keith Richards, and my husband is going to freak out to know that he came up in our conversation.
He's terrified of the stuff.
Really?
Yes. People ask him, how he's been so, long lived and all that sort of stuff. And he says it's because he doesn't eat cheese. And he will talk about cheese for minutes on end about how horrible the stuff is and how it's just strange and unnatural. And why would anyone eat
Oh
this
my
rotten, decayed milk product?
Keith, I
And
thought I knew you.
he's the enemy of all things cheese, apparently.
I wonder if he would like my whiskey cheddar, because I feel like that's something he does love, and it's sneakily introduced into cheese. So maybe he'd be a little more amenable to that.
I'm
I'll
not
have to
sure if he
reach out
listens
to
to
him and
this.
see.
I'm not sure if he listens to this podcast, but Keith, if you are out there, um, maybe rethink your anti-cheese ways.
For
Well, thank you so
sure.
much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it, and it is Cheese Teak in Alexandria, Virginia. A little plug for the business there, and the restaurant is where? Is it also in Alexandria?
Yes, so Cheese Teak has the cheese shop and the restaurant, and then we have an Italian restaurant in Arlington, in the Shirlington
Arlington,
neighborhood, called Corso.
of course. Great.
Hmm.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed it,
Thank
and
you,
good luck with
Kevin. Thank
everything.
you for having me.
That concludes our most recent episode of How the World Works. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jill Erber as much as I did. There will be a link to the video in the show notes if you'd like to watch it on YouTube. And thanks for listening. We will see you next month.